Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm David Kirkpatrick, and I'm a writer, and I run a little company called Economies Media, which is devoted to themes very similar to those we're discussing here today. And that theme is innovation, whether it's happening, and if it isn't happening enough, how can we make it happen more? And it's a fantastic group that we have to do that. So I'm going to just sort of name them first and then ask them each to briefly introduce themselves at slightly more length. They are quite an amazing group. Carlos Dominguez, sitting right next to me, is the Senior Vice President of Cisco, who's really spends a lot of his time thinking about and talking about the role that innovation and technology play in making the world a better place. And I like the fact that one of the things that he does is he's on the board of a group called the Institute of Large-Scale Innovation, which is a name after my own heart, actually. Next to him is Michael Furtick, who's the CEO of Reputation.com and one of the really leading entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, and was recently recognized as such as Entrepreneur of the Year by the Tech America Foundation. So he's really hot, and we're happy to have him. And as you'll find out, he's not shy with his opinions. Next to him, a very old friend of mine, John Clippinger, who is currently you're at MIT, but you were at Harvard like right 2 weeks ago or something, right? But anyway, he's in Cambridge, and he came from the world of artificial intelligence, but now he's basically doing a lot of extremely cutting-edge work on identity management, rights management for information, which is actually not at all unrelated to some of the work that Michael's doing at Reputation.com, and they know each other fairly well as a result of that. Next to him is Tom Malone of MIT, whose exact title is, sorry, Tom, Patrick J. McGovern, somebody else I admire, Professor of Management at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and Tom is one of the world's leading experts on management organization and how to make companies more effective and more innovative, really, and to really organizations that work. And we've talked a lot over the years as well. Finally, at the end, Solomon Asefa from IBM, who's a senior research scientist at Watson Research Center there. I won't even begin to try to describe what he does because it involves so many very complex scientific and fiber optic and micro semiconductor concepts that there's too many acronyms in any sentence that describes what he does, but maybe he can, when he speaks, briefly describe some of the things that he does. He's won a lot of awards. He's from Ethiopia. He's much younger than the rest of us and probably a lot smarter. But he's a real practitioner, whereas, so is Michael, actually, and the rest of us, and well, actually John now, who I've known as a more kind of theoretician over most of my, well, actually, you've gone back and forth between, you wrote a book about identity.
Yeah, Carlos is a practitioner, too. Yeah.
Carlos is a practitioner, but he just told me that he spends a lot of his time explaining things, so he's a long-time practitioner.
Myself, by the way.
Anyway, I don't know what I am, but let me just start by asking each of you to answer the sort of, what to me is maybe the most interesting question of the discussion, which is whether or not there really is meaningful innovation underway in the world today in the sense of socially transformative innovation that can drive the world forward in a way that it needs to be driven forward. So can we start with you, Carlos, on that? And just take a couple minutes on that one, and we'll go to plenty of other things. And we'll involve you all with your questions and comments also.
First of all, you're very shy, so I don't know how you got this gig to host us, but great. So let me begin by really just answering the question. And I think more innovation is happening today than ever in the world has before in the history of mankind. And it's quite simple when you think about a globally connected world where we're all there. We're just at the very, very beginning of being able to connect people around issues and be able to solve some of the world's most complex problems that we have. I think that when you look at it from where I sit in a large corporation, I think the management side and how the org structure, and Tom's an expert at that, is really going to change, because one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, where does innovation live in a company? Is it the role of one individual? Is it the role of a particular group? And the answer is absolutely not. And then the second question you have to ask are the brightest people in the world, do they work for your company or do they work for you? And the answer is no. So it becomes very, very simple in a globally connected world when we have these systems that can bring people together and we can be much more collaborative. How do you harness that intelligence and that collaborative spirit that can exist first within your company, then within your partners and your customers, and ultimately how do you open it up to the world? So a lot of innovation's happening. It's a great time to be alive, but I think we're only at the very beginning.
But you have no doubt that significant innovation is underway in the sense that we would most want to see it?
Yes, I think the innovation that's taking place is extremely significant. It's much greater than any other time in the history, I think, of mankind. The challenge, or the way I see it, is has it reached its potential, David? And I say it's just at the beginning, because when you put process around it and you build systems that allow you to be much more collaborative. I mean, the example that I would give you is we build these incredible telepresence systems that allow you to eliminate distance. Distance is dead. So those systems is a technology, and those technologies allow you to collaborate. But what do you collaborate on? You collaborate around, being more innovative, better customer relationships, solving complex problems. You can do around all those things. But one thing these systems don't do is they don't shape human behavior in any sort of way. So I think what's still to come, especially on the technological side, is how do we take a system like a telepresence and start putting some visual cues to enhance the outcomes of human communication. So we're at the very beginning of that.
Yeah, I want to get later into where we would love to see all of it go. So that's a good step in that right direction. Michael, your thoughts?
Yeah.
Are we in an innovative world?
Yes, innovation is happening and accelerating. I think that it's easy to observe that as markets become more liberal, as the world gets smaller, as rules get lifted, the number of atoms in the jar increases and the atoms collide, so innovation happens. I hope we talk about something other than Silicon Valley innovation today, because a lot of, or in addition to Silicon Valley innovation, a lot of the world looks at Silicon Valley quite correctly as a place of innovation. We are quite innovative. But there's a lot of innovation happening outside of Silicon Valley. And a lot of what passes for innovation inside Silicon Valley, I think squarely is not innovative. There are, for example, changes in social media where you have a new product that is sort of one pixel different from another product, and then the tech press will explode over itself saying this is a hugely world-changing event, and it's not. You just get to share photos differently of your dog. So it's not always innovation. There is very innovative stuff happening in Silicon Valley. And the thing I will say about Silicon Valley that may assist in framing the discussion either in your minds or for the panel is that there are basically two kinds of innovation that happen in Silicon Valley through venture-backed companies. One is basically the bucket of faster, better, cheaper, and the other is the bucket of Brave New World. And neither is more noble or ennobling than the other. Faster, better, cheaper is there's a market for something, we know it, we're going to do it a lot better or faster or cheaper than anyone else has ever done it. And by the way, that yields Google, that gets you Facebook. There are a lot of amazing companies and exits that begin their lives as faster, better, cheaper. And then there's Brave New World, which is the world is not, it is changing now, or we as a company will make it change, or we will force the hand of change. The world is different and will be different and must be different, and we are going to articulate that and represent that and fly the flag for that kind of innovation and change. And that's a different kind of innovation. That gets you IBM, that gets you Amazon, eBay back in the day, Yahoo back in the day, and many of the really big companies are other Brave New World companies. So I care much more about Brave New World kinds of innovation. It's harder, it's more expensive, it's higher risk, but the outcomes are much more magical and marvelous. That's what I care about from the perspective of Silicon Valley.
John Clippinger, and clarification, I'm with the Media Lab on the Human Dynamics Group, and also a founder with Sandy Pentland, who's the head of the Human Dynamics Group of a nonprofit called ID Cubed. And what we're trying to do with ID Cube is sort of data-driven design, new institutional design. And it's very, so I'm sort of in the camp with Michael and sort of saying, okay, what would the Brave New World? And I do think there's sort of an East Coast, West Coast kind of divide on that. I think it's important that there's certain kinds of innovation. Yes, faster, better, cheaper is important, but Farmville 3, is it really important? And I think that, yes, you're getting a lot of, if you're looking at the funding of a lot of companies, that way, if you go to a lot of these startup, these incubators and things, you say what percentage of those are really fundamentally innovative, and how are people actually rethinking certain kinds of infrastructure, very fundamental issues. I think that Peter Thiel has a point, and that there's a lot of change, there's some money being made, but I think we are at a point where there are some fundamental changes. I think as we move into the social media, this is social technologies, what we call the social stack, and in a sense that how do you deal with identity as certifying people? How do you create new kinds of digital institutions, that institutions themselves are being redesigned and can be scaled in a different way? New models of governance, new models of transparency, and there's an opportunity to do that afresh. So part of our framing is there's a new social stack for a new social contract, and that entails technologies mapping and intersecting with policy. So you can't sort of separate law from technology. Before I was at MIT, the Berkman Center, we founded something called the Law Lab. And the idea was recognizing that law is a rule-making system, and how do you make rules that are rapidly scalable, evolvable, and appropriately can adapt to the circumstances that you're in, because the regulatory process now cannot keep pace with the technology. So I think that's going to be a new source of innovation that'll be really profound. I mean, I look at things, I'm also in synthetic biology, 3D printing, the whole maker movement. I think that's very profound and transformative. 3D printing of tissue, when you start to think that through, that's a whole new kind of infrastructure. That's a whole new value system. We're rapidly in that world. The other area that I'm involved with in artificial intelligence you mentioned is also machine learning is a big thing. And the fact that you can now put things in the cloud, and you can, there's open source software, and you can access things through, not only this is what you're doing too. You Hadoop and you get Mahout. Suddenly, you think of something. What we're finding in a software development process is I would like to have this, and then at some point someone's out there doing it. There's a framework, and then what's the API to get it? It's sort of this zeitgeist simultaneity of innovation that's sort of syncing up and pulling things together in a new way that's never been done. I started a number of companies. The software development process is very different now than it ever was before, and I'll end with that.
That's good. There's a lot of things I want to follow up on in that, but we'll get to that in a minute. Tom, and make sure you all speak into the mic. I think everybody can hear, but it's a little nicer when it's slightly more amplified.
Okay.
Okay, so I agree with all the other panelists so far that there's plenty of innovation happening. I think it's important to realize that the innovation that counts is not just technical innovation. I think a lot of the most important innovations we are seeing and are going to see is innovations in how humans interact with humans. New ways of organizing work, new ways of organizing societies, new ways of socializing. Those are objects of invention just as importantly, perhaps more importantly, than new ways of making bits connect to other bits to do particular functions. So I think we've already seen some recent and relatively and very interesting examples of that. I'd say Wikipedia is a pretty good example of that. The technology, yes, it's nice that you can use the internet and use editing software that Wikipedia uses, but what I think is really amazing about Wikipedia is the organizational invention. That you can get thousands of people without even being paid to do these things, to create one of the biggest kind of intellectual products that we know with almost no centralized control. That's a really interesting innovation. You could say open source software is another example of such a social innovation. I think we're about to see, and I wrote in Harvard Business Review last year about this, a whole lot of new innovations along the lines of what you might call hyper-specialization. So we all know what division of labor is. We saw a lot of benefits from that starting with factories several hundred years ago. I think we're now about to see a lot more division of labor, what we would call hyper-specialization of labor in knowledge work, not just physical work. Because the internet makes it possible to have economies of scale on a global basis now with knowledge work. You can transport any information almost instantly, almost free, almost anywhere. So that means one person sitting right here can be the global expert or the global specialist on a tiny, tiny task, like looking at a picture and seeing if there's a dog in the upper left corner, or the kind of things that Mechanical Turk and other systems like that do. So I think we're going to see a lot more of those social innovations. I want to make one other claim in my opening comments here, which is that innovation may not be the best term for what we really care about. Innovation means something new, and new is nice if it's well suited to our environment. But innovations that are not well suited to our environment are of not much use to us and not very interesting. So what we really want, I think, is not just innovation for its own sake. What we want is changes that make us, whoever the us that we care about is, that changes that make us better adapted to the situation in which we find ourselves. So we really want people, and especially organizations, who are good at adapting to ever-changing situations. And we actually have another really good word for that in English. It's intelligence. People who are good at learning quickly, people who are good at adapting to changing situations, to figuring stuff out quickly, one word for that is intelligence. And I think the word intelligence is perhaps an even more useful word for part of what we really want. In this case, of course, we're not just talking about individual intelligence, we're talking about the intelligence of groups, of organizations, what we call in our research center by that name at MIT, what we call collective intelligence. So if you really force me, I might tell you about some of the ways we've developed to actually measure collective intelligence in at least a simple form of small groups that I think may have some implications for how we think about collective intelligence on much larger scales.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So Solomon, from somebody who's really in the trenches of really building new things that are quite clear-cut and to some extent in where they will be applied. How do you think of what you're doing in the context of this discussion and you know, as also an employee at IBM, which has had such a transformative impact on the world, how do you look at the bigger picture of whether significant innovation is happening?
Well, okay, I guess let me start by saying, as a scientist with limited business experience, maybe my views might be a little bit naive, and you might want to take them with a grain of salt, right? That being said,
we take what everybody says with a grain.
That being said, I think the question itself about the pace of innovation is, for me, it's very complex. I don't even know how do you measure that, right? Because, I mean, are you talking about innovations that are happening in the labs now? And most of us don't even know what's happening in a lab at MIT or NYU or wherever it is, right? And also, you know, like was mentioned before, it's not really about Silicon Valley anymore. Innovation is happening everywhere. You go to wherever, Mali, Addis Ababa, wherever you are, wherever, there's a lot of innovation happening, and it's happening in different cultural contexts. So it's very difficult to, you know, in a very short time, say a lot about innovation, right? And the pace at which it's growing and so forth. Now, that being said, I would say there's a lot of progress in digital innovation. I mean, we live in a world that's extremely interconnected, extremely interconnected and intelligent, right? Almost everything here is digitally aware. So there's a lot of information coming from there, and I think the way we view things are going to be changing. I think the way we make decisions are going to be changing drastically. So decades of investment that went into a lot of innovation are now going to be transforming how our society operates, and they're going to be driving a lot of innovations. So I think we're at just a different junction, and I would say that we're in a very positive kind of slope in terms of the rate of progress that we're making, right? Once again, now that being said, we have to be very careful. Obviously, we're not going to be eating our iPhones, or if it gets very cold in the winter, we're not going to be using our social network, to keep warm, right? So the question is, on some of the other topics like food security, right, water, and other very important topics, even like if we're thinking in terms of grand challenges, world peace, where does technology fit in? How is our innovation going to address those challenges? And I think that we're not making a lot of investment in those areas. I think most of the innovations in those areas are still in the labs, and there's a lot to be done there. So
You're saying we're not making enough investment in those areas, in your view?
yeah, well, once again, from the limited that I know, I think there's a lot in the labs, and a lot of professors, a lot of students have quite a big problem taking those concepts out of the lab and getting them to market. And also you have to be careful, because some of these ideas will actually take a long time to develop. We're talking about 10, 20 years. Do we have the patience anymore to invest on professors, students, so that they actually take their time to develop these concepts? Do we have the patience to pay students loans so that when they finish their college, they go to some labs or stay in the labs and continue tackling these problems? I think given the economic dynamics that we're in, given that we have changed on how we view information, how we deal with it, the fact that we want some quick returns, we're not doing too much in those things. On the relevant questions that will be very, very important in, say, 30, 40 years,
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up that big picture set of issues like even peace, because I think when one tries to assess this question at the highest level, you have to acknowledge that the world does face gigantic challenges that are effectively unaddressed, despite a lot of incremental progress we're making in a lot of areas. The distribution of nutrition would be one, probably a massive one. Peace is clearly, whatever that means, something we need to aspire to a lot more than we have successfully done thus far. And whether innovation is the tool for that, I'm not certain, although I would suspect the answer is that it could contribute significantly. And I guess that's something I'd be interested in all of you sort of taking the discussion up another notch and say, what do you think are the biggest things that the world needs to address? The biggest possible things you can think of, and is innovation tackling those things right now? Michael, you have a pregnant facial expression. What about you?
Okay, it's a powerful question you ask, and I think my list is long, and I'm going to choose one thing that I think could be a key big innovation or area for innovation that is essential and can answer many of the long-term and long-tail challenges that Solomon and you have just proposed. So it's only one, but I would say that access to excellent information is a key driver of many other things. Access to excellent information, easy and distributed access to excellent information of all kinds, almost all kinds, is a key driver of the rapid diminishment of cost. I'm 33, I started my first company when I was 19. When I was 19, it took 2 years and $10 million to build a piece of software. Now it takes 2 months and 40 grand.
Because of the availability of information in part?
Chiefly, fundamentally, as a function of the availability of information, which is expressed either as raw data or analytics or conclusions or tools, which then allow cost to collapse, allow storage and addition costs to collapse, allow friction to collapse. And eventually, I'm now calling back to my mind a conversation we had at the Aspen Institute a couple months ago about food security and the connection, for example, between the cost of information, the future of robotics, the cost of the future cost of robotics, and in a low-cost robotics-driven or available society, you have perhaps as close to free food as humanly possible. That was the kind of the line.
Say that again?
So low-cost information, low-cost development of technology, low-cost as applied to robotics, lower-cost robotics, cheap robots, cheap robots, nearly free food.
In other words, the robots are planting the fields and reaping the
So everybody who's now in farming loses their jobs, but we get free food as a result. That was the debate.
That's not funny. That's
No,
a real
it's
thing.
no, it's not funny.
I mean, that
and-
kind of thing is applying all across the
Right.
economy
And so-
over the next few years, whether we want to talk about it or not.
So that so what
it's
we
good
have
and bad.
right, it's good and bad, and the powerful thing is maybe you get free food. The bad thing is what we've seen now in our society for the first time, due to the widespread dissemination of information, basically, and the growth of an information economy, is the normal distribution of things, which looks like a bell curve, basically in nature almost everywhere. The normal distribution curve, right? Bell curve, is now disappearing rapidly in a lot of economies and a lot of areas, and it's being replaced with the power law curve, which looks a lot like this, right? And which means that almost everything goes to a very tiny number of people. And the spoils of a new economy, the spoils of a new industry.
The spoils of robotics.
Spoils of robotics.
Economically, for example.
Economically, though not foodly, right?
Right.
And so you asked a very provocative and powerful question about what one thing I would nominate, which I have to nominate. It's a very difficult question, but what one thing I would nominate? I would say that increased access to information will be fundamentally, through Wikipedia and other types of disseminating tools, a very powerful. Take, for example, the field of academia and the field of this just feudal and terrible way that scientific journals evaluate publications now, right? So you have graduate students doing very powerful and innovative work, and they have to wait 3 years to get rejected by 3 different journals before the 4th journal finally accepts them for peer review, and then the 4th year or the 3rd year.
Yeah, but these days people just are publishing it anyway. Tom really wants to say
So that's the
something.
idea. We should publish them to the internet. That allows access to information. More innovation will happen, and then you get free food at the end of that line.
I'm glad I picked up on your facial expression, but Tom.
So I have a quick response to the free food question and then another problem to nominate. On the free food question, maybe there's more to the argument than you just summarized, but it's not at all obvious to me how even if farm labor is costing zero, the food is free.
That's true.
There's lots of, actually farm labor is a tiny fraction of food price today. There's many other resources involved like the farmland and the transportation and all that. So I think there may be more to the story needed to make that work.
There's more story.
In terms of a question that I would nominate as a key problem, there's lots of things like peace and education and all that kind of stuff, which would be good in general for lots of things. But I think there's one problem that's very concrete and many people would say quite urgent that we face, which is global climate change. If we don't solve that problem in some way, a lot of other stuff is going to get a lot worse.
Yeah.
And there's a fairly short time frame to do that, and I think there's real opportunity for innovation in addressing that problem.
Well, that's a really good one. Yeah, John.
Okay, I think to follow up on both.
Put your mic close to your face,
My
please.
colleagues here. I agree that global warming is a huge problem, and I agree that the food issue is a problem. Robotics, and it's clear that you're going to, in a not too far distant future, you're going to have cheap, smart robots, and it's going to happen. But I think a lot of this comes back. These issues are institutional issues. That if you really look, are you really going to get 150 countries around the world to vote through and have a new kind of global treaty, and they're all going to agree in the time it takes to actually address global warming in the conventional institutional methods that we have currently? A whole notion of what a consensus is and what a participation in a democratic institution. I think we're at the area of institutional governance design is going to be, that's a new area of technology in my view. And how that's done, and I think there are things that are happening there that are profoundly transformative. And just have a brief riff on this, and I do have a horse in this race, so I'm pushing it. But what institutions have done for forever is define membership, who you are, identity, and then on basis of that, you get certain rights and you're allocated certain resources. And that, whether that's the church or the state or a HMO, and how that's done is a whole set of credentials, and that tends to be very static, and it has a point of corruption because you're concentrating power. Well, you're seeing now I think the same dynamics that have happened. You know where I'm going to go with this, but you're in the whole ability to create credentialing systems and be able to allocate privileges in a more secure and distributed way, you're going to see all new kinds of institutional structures that I think I'm very positive about. That's going to open up opportunities that never there before, and you're going to get the same kind of scaling you get out of social networks. And it's going to be more secure, it's going to be more distributed, and it's going to be more effective, and it's going to be more dynamic and not static. But it's going to be a huge shift, and you have legacy interests that are going to resist that, and so that's going to be one of the real challenges.
Do you think governments are going to be willing to deal with that, John? I mean, that's a big.
Well, I mean, it's already happened. The whole idea of a nation-state of government and what a sovereignty is in a state is being undermined. What kind of real authority do they have? And as you have networks,
well, they all think they have a lot of authority,
sure,
and a lot of them have a lot of guns also.
But they say you have you have a section on asymmetric warfare. I mean, you're seeing a change. I'm not, and I'm just saying this is like a natural phenomenon that you're having the technology. There's a whole set of forces in place that's going to force a new kind of institutional structure, or you're going to oscillate in the fight between these. I'm not predicting the outcome.
I want to say something, and I want Solomon to speak as an Ethiopian at some point on this. From a point of view of coming from a country that needs to be a beneficiary of a lot of this stuff more than we do, shall we say. But I wanted to just point out on this issue of governance, in case you might veer to another area. There is things happening that people don't, in my opinion, properly identify, whether they are accurately called innovation. I think they are, but for example, the role of the Weibos in China, to me, is a fascinating case of governance changing before our eyes in an unremarked upon manner. So in fact, China, in some ways, is moving more toward direct democracy than any other country in the world. And it's partly because of all the censors, because they know what their people are saying at all times. And we don't know that in this country. Now, they may not like what those people are saying.
Weibo is the Twitter of China, in case.
Yeah, the Weibos are the Twitters of China used by a much larger percentage of the people of China than Twitter is used here. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of people commenting on literally everything, literally all the time. And there's two of them that are each over 300 million users. But I'm not saying that it's a solution. The point I'm saying is that it is an evolution of governance that is not often identified properly. And you see things like that happening because of the internet and technology, and you recognize that it's hard to make generalizations.
David, you're often the cheerleader for technology, which I love about you, but I want to also add, just for the benefit of the audience, that in China, you have to have a personal ID attached to your Twitter address, your Weibo address, so that everything you Weibo about, everything you tweet about is known and knowable by the government to your name, your actual real name.
That's very true.
So before we...
I'm not calling it a panacea. I'm saying it's an evolution of governance.
Direct democracy in China. You have to understand that everything that's said, right? So last week, the next premier disappeared, and due to a back injury, the phrase back injury, searches for the phrase back injury were banned on Weibo. So just let's take a pause before we explode about the direct democracy.
I'm not asking to emulate their system.
He's not being normative. I have to give him defense.
So go ahead. Don't forget, Solomon's got to come in.
No problem.
I do this a lot. I do this a lot.
I'll keep it simple. As I'm listening to all these grand challenges and where do you focus the energy, and what I do for a living is I actually try to deploy technology and try to deploy it inside the company, outside the company, and what we push against all the time, whether it's for innovation or whatever, is the fact that humans don't like change. I mean, there was a crazy report, I don't know how accurate it is, but they said after a severe heart attack, right, only 1 in 5 people actually alter the way they eat, the way they exercise, and they stop smoking. So if you don't change when your life depends on it, only 1 out of 5, can you imagine when you and I come up with a great idea and we show up and we're here in front of everybody and say, hey, David and I have a great idea, we're going to do this way, it's a new innovation. 4 out of 5 of you won't change when your life depends on it. What are you going to change when David and I come up with that idea?
Fascinating point.
Right, so part of the thought here is, we're at a level, when you look at the technology curves in every aspect of our lives, it's going to continue to accelerate. We're more connected than ever. There's more innovation. There's more capability to collaborate. There's all of these things. And I thought, John, you brought it really to the point where you said, we need systems that can really challenge the things that are really difficult to challenge. We have more technology, but how do you put the policy in place to really leverage? And a lot on change is really about loss. Every time you implement something new that's greater and better, to your point, is, we can feed the world for free, well, almost, but, the farmers now don't have jobs. That's the loss. So it's understanding this dynamic, which is more human-based, more than technology, more than innovation, anything else, to really, once you get to the crux of it, then you can actually build a plan to maybe how you can deploy. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face.
Well, I'm going to go to Solomon, though, again, because I'd love, I mean, could you go to where I was asking you to go before?
Yeah, sure. Actually, it's a very good question, because it's only like about 3-4 weeks ago, IBM opened a new research lab, the first one in Kenya, in Nairobi.
Wow.
And the reason for that is not because IBM just wants to go and help. The reason is IBM believes that there's a lot of innovation that's going to come out of there.
Sure.
Wow.
It's a new culture, and I go back to the previous point that I mentioned. The world is really becoming interconnected, intelligent, instrumented. And what does that mean? That means that you have a lot of data that's coming out, and if you utilize new innovations such as massive analytics, cloud computing, and so forth, you're going to transform how society functions. So now, why operate in, say, Kenya, which targets basically the whole of East Africa? That's because then, we can think about water resources, right? How do you manage that? There's a lot of issues there. If you, for example, consider the Nile and so forth, there's a lot of things that could be done in terms of how you do water management. Natural resource management is another topic. How do you do crop management, right? There's a lot of ideas. For example, you can think about precision agriculture, where you can use nanotechnology to, like basically figure out, what crops you need and so forth. You can utilize your advanced machines so that you gather historical data of weather, right? And you can actually, implant sensors everywhere and gather real-time data, analyze that, and really come out with, very concrete kind of, conclusions, and even predict for the future. So these are things that are going to be transforming how the society operates. And if you combine that with the skill development that's happening in the region, now a lot of innovations will be coming out. These issues like food security, water resources, natural resource management, and so forth, those are not just African problems or African challenges. The thing is, they're needed to be done now, and those innovations that will come out will be affecting the West very soon. So it's a very strategic decision, and this type of innovations are really, really having kind of real-time impact now.
Well, it's also a statement by IBM about what kind of innovation is actually needed for the world, and that it implicitly will have a lot of impact on Africa, or else it's not that significant in a sense, right?
Yes, yes.
But this, I wanted to go back to Tom, because, you said before that, we maybe focus too much on technical innovation, but then when you listed a bunch of things that you thought were significant, like new ways of organizing work in societies, et cetera, it struck me that isn't it almost always these days the internet in some fashion, or technical innovations at root, that are facilitating those changes, which is why I find parsing this whole question quite challenging, because, it's undeniable there's this whole aggregation of things that we might call petty, small-scale stuff, but that when put all together creates new sets of capabilities, and sometimes the most transformative Brave New World, to take Michael's term, type of things are simply a creative combination of what we would otherwise identify as relatively small stuff, right?
Yeah. So absolutely, that most innovations, maybe even all, are really combinations of things that have already existed, but you just put them together in a new way. And you're also absolutely right that the examples I listed of organizational or social innovation, all the ones I listed were examples of technologically enabled organizational or social innovation. And I think that's not an accident. It's not impossible to have organizational or social innovations that don't involve new technology, but because technology is changing so fast for other reasons, especially, I think, new cheap communication is enabling all kinds of amazing new things. Because communication is getting so much cheaper, faster, and easier, that means many, many, many new ways of organizing human interaction are becoming possible.
Yeah.
What I think is important to realize, though, is that it's not just, or even perhaps not primarily, the technical infrastructure that enables that that's important. That is certainly necessary. But the real creativity, the real innovation is in the human interactions that are on top of that platform.
Well, you know, my own personal life is dominated by working in my own company, Economies, which is devoted to this idea. We organize conferences and other things, media. Technology is central to all business and social progress. That is our, you know, endlessly repeated argument. And one of the reasons we repeat that argument so much, to go back to another theme of this panel that we didn't really touch on yet, is that we believe, I believe very strongly, that leaders in general in the world, in business and government and nonprofits, basically don't in general have a clue about almost anything we're discussing on this panel, because they almost all are these baby boomer or older dudes who are, you know, riding around in their, you know, Escalades or whatever with a driver, and, you know, somebody else still sometimes even doing their frickin' email. Yes. And they don't really know how much it's changing. So, I mean, any of you, I guess, because since so much, originally this panel was intended to ask what organizations need to do to innovate more. Is that an extreme statement I just made? And if it is, how can organizations, maybe this is one for you, Carlos, since you're, you know, probably from the biggest company here, I guess you are, how can organizations, even like Cisco itself, move quickly enough and innovate quickly enough, given the human tendency to be complacent, which you yourself just referred to?
Well, it's a really deep question, and one that, you know, get back to my initial comment, is where does innovation live in an organization? And in most places, in most companies I talk to, it's a person or a small little group, and it's kind of a ridiculous idea. You know, as we move forward, one of the organizational structures for large corporations is that everyone is tasked with innovation. Now, here's an interesting part. When you go to the bottom of an organization, they're really smart. They really are. They know what's going on, but there's chaos down there. And then in most organizations at the top, and I'm there, right, you know, we're dumber and slower, right? We're not operating at those same dimensions. So part of the artwork here is, how do you meet in the middle? How do you create platforms that allow the smart people at the bottom to filter up in a way that's organized? How do you create strategies and cultural norms at the top that enable this chaos to come up and do it in a way that doesn't destroy the company, right? And how do you reward people for those innovations? Who goes with it? How do you choose and decide? I mean, Tom's an expert at all of that. And the key is, you know, you got to do it from within first. Then you got to expose it to, you know, your partners. We've got tons. I mean, 90% of our business is through partners. You don't, you know, I know for a fact they want us to be successful. I know they can help us. So as you look at, you know, your base of assets, your employees are one, your partners are the other. The third is your customers. If your customers have invested millions of dollars in you, they want you to be successful. And the irony of this is most corporations go to crowdsource and to innovate, they go outside first, which is kind of ridiculous. So I think we need to do a platform. Now, the good news, what I am seeing, there was a recent IBM Solomon report that you guys
And that is a bigger company. My apologies to Solomon.
Yeah. Okay. You know, you guys did a report on where you interviewed 1,700 CEOs, and they always ask the question, what external factor has the most impact on your company? And for the first time since they've been doing the reports in 2004, you know what the answer was? Technology.
Oh, finally.
Finally.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, they said the social media word in that report too. They said that, you know, most CEOs think that they're going to interface to their consumers and customers through social media. So there's a shift.
What about their employees, though? That's what you're kind of getting at.
Yeah, but it's not there yet.
I mean, it's interesting.
There's a problem. So I think there's a problem with, at a large company, the large companies suffer from some problems when it comes to innovation. This is not new, but one of the fundamental structural problems is that when it comes to commercial innovation, the word innovation doesn't sound like $1 billion, it sounds like $1 million of income. And it's very hard to get senior management attention at a large company for, hey, we got $1 million in new income coming. And it's a very rational decision for excellent managers of large companies to say, well, we don't care about that, because when it gets to 100 million, we're going to buy the guy who's got $100 million, and we're going to buy that innovation. It works. By the way, it works. There's a group of European professors who studied management with the bias that European managers would be better. And they used a football metaphor. They said after all their study, Americans are the Brazilians of management. So there's a reasonably rational point of view that when it comes to commercial innovation of dollars, you can buy it. On the other hand, I think that part of what Carlos is talking about is innovation at the edge in behavior, and this maybe connects what Tom and Carlos are talking about. In the sense that if you empower everybody in the company to do certain things within rational guidelines, then you can have a certain kind of behavior change throughout the company that has benefit. So Four Seasons, imagine me talking about Four Seasons, a technology person talking about, I think it's Four Seasons or Ritz-Carlton, the one that says, ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen is their mission. The decision they made that comes to mind is that they empowered every person in the company, from the bellhops to the waiters to the busboys and so forth, to spend up to $3,000 making a customer happy without approval from management. Now, by the way, it almost never happens because people are, all of a sudden, they own the money. That's my $3,000. It's not mine. They don't get to keep it. But that's the company's fisc, and I don't know if I actually want to reach in the company's fisc to make someone happy. But the point is, if a customer's unhappy, if the client's unhappy, you can do something to take them to the zoo or get them tickets for something, spend up to $3,000, they can make the person happy. That is a form of organizational and managerial innovation that yielded huge benefits in the customer interaction without social media, without touching anything like this, through the behavior, and that is an innovation that does work at a large organization through the organization.
David, I would like to respond to that a little bit because we work with we have some sponsors or large companies, and there's this huge effort of bigger companies saying how do we innovate, and then can we put it in a bottle and give it to all our people and they'll be innovative.
Yeah, and stay powerful at the top.
I said, it doesn't work that way.
Shucks.
Right. So one of the things that I've started companies over the last 30 years, and AI companies primarily, and what I've seen is a dramatic change, and it's something that's very different, and I can't get through my head, is that technology is culture now, and that particularly the social media and so people are now connecting. If you don't hire a technology, you don't hire a programmer. You exemplify a certain cultural value that attracts certain skills of people, right? And they come together, and they want to express themselves that way, and so you hold events. So you become very social, and you're looking for the next tick of what is where people are reinventing themselves in terms of their technology, and that's where you get the really good people. Now the other challenge of that is that we have a fellows program that's primarily directed at Harvard and MIT people, and what you'll find is that we have someone from 30 down to 20. They're like 4 generations in there. It's true. It's really true, and they don't. They're real because the technology has changed so much. There's so much discontinuity. Yeah. Now think about that. Now how do companies deal with that? Yeah. And that's nothing compared to what's happening in biotech. And what's really interesting, biotech makes like Moore's law look flat, right? And so you have, and MIT has this problem. You say you spend 4 years getting a PhD instead of genomics or whatever, but the time is taking you to learn the tools and do your dissertation, you're out of date. Yeah, absolutely. So it doesn't work. So, and when we look at where the real knowledge exists around technology, what's happening, it's not within a company, it's within a network of people who have relationships who share certain kind of values, and out of that come a lot of this open source software. So we're working on stuff, and suddenly there's this whole new framework about how to do virtual machines and virtual networks to completely transform their thinking, and guys working in the woods of Vermont was into that, not out of the MIT. So it's very, very different, and we're in a different world, a different ecosystem.
At the Media Lab, though, at the Media Lab, in your building, there's a team working on how to plant a seed that grows a house. There you go. Plant a seed and the house grows.
Oh,
that's innovation.
I want to get to Tom, but I want to make sure you all get a chance to throw in your comments and questions, so that will happen momentarily. But Tom, this is Tom's forte, this organizational theory and practice. I wanted to say, do companies even realize they have these problems, Tom?
Some do. Some do.
Enough?
No?
No.
No.
What I wanted to do was to kind of emphasize the point that Michael and Carlos were making, that it's not surprising that lots of the examples they gave involved giving lots more autonomy to lots more people. That's something that generates lots of new, often innovative ideas. And as David and some of you know, that's something I talked about a lot in my book on the future of work a number of years ago, that new technology, cheap communication technology, makes it possible for you to give a lot more autonomy to a lot more people and still have them knowledgeable enough to use that autonomy in ways that still work with the overall picture of things, because they can have the information that allows them to do that. The other point I wanted to make is that just having a lot of new ideas being generated, which is something you get when a lot of people have a lot of autonomy, that alone is not sufficient for innovation. Yes. You have to also have some way of recognizing the good ideas when they come up. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an area where we don't yet have as many good ideas as we need about organizational inventions to do that. How do we create the kind of group decision-making systems that help us recognize the good ideas bubbling up from all these little autonomous people all over the place?
Really interesting. Oh, Solomon, you want to say?
Yeah, if I can make a comment. Unlike you, I'm actually at the bottom of the pyramid, so I'm just a regular scientist. So I can observe how, I'm interacting with
You're the smart guy. I'm the dumb one. Remember that.
So I think I see three kind of interesting trends there. One is somehow, I don't know how the management managed to do this, but they have kind of made us, think globally. Like, we're told to be global thinkers. By that I mean, for example, we have to collaborate with different labs, maybe in Zurich, like in Almaden here, there, and so forth. So we have given some sort of autonomy to actually call our colleagues internationally and think about any type of problems that we have. And that culture kind of reminds me of, my university days at MIT and so forth. It's a very, very interesting culture. The other culture that I observe is the multidisciplinary approach that IBM has. For example, if you look at the physical sciences department that I'm in, we have people working on biology, chemistry, mathematics, neuroscience, obviously engineers, physicists, some social scientists, and so forth. And I would say on average, on a daily basis, I get to interact with people from 3 different fields. And whether you like it or not, that leads to innovation. We have so many patents. Just the fact that we can go to the cafeteria and, have coffee ends up generating a lot of ideas, and that's why IBM continues to be a leader in terms of patents.
Yeah, also the fact that they're willing to spend such a vast amount of money on R&D, which most companies are afraid
exactly.
to do.
And to that, there's the third point is we actually have basically some amount of dollars that we can go and invest in terms of collaboration with universities. So I get to work with a lot of colleagues in universities and so forth. You can give them faculty awards, the professors could come, the students could come, and so forth. So somehow this culture has permeated throughout the organization, and I think that will continue to drive innovation in the future. And hopefully it's something that will happen everywhere else.
Yeah, and look at the stock price over the last 10 years, too. Somebody had a hand over here.
I find this very impressive. I disagree.
Great. Okay. Good. Let's hear what.
I don't know where to start. I wouldn't know where to start, so I've distilled.
Identify yourself, if you would. Yeah.
Paul Wilmot.
What do you do?
Lots of things. I'm a professional skeptic. Let's stick with that.
Okay.
So I've distilled into one question for Michael. Have you read Brave New World?
Yes, I have. I appreciate your skepticism. I think, let me see if I can understand what motivates your skepticism. So in the future, there will be a time when machines do more stuff and people suffer. Is that the basis of your skepticism, or have I articulated poorly?
That's part of it, definitely, that's part of it. And then all that talk about food, etc.
I would think you'd ask that question to Clippinger more than, because what Clippinger was saying about identity and all that.
I'll go for it.
Do you want to do it?
No, go, Michael. Yeah.
But do you think Brave New World is a good model, though? I mean, you use the book as an example. You said Amazon was like Brave New World. I don't know how anyone can use Brave New World as a... I'm comparing with 1984.
This is a moment of syncresis, people. So I did not intend to talk about the venal totalitarian outcomes articulated by an author 100 years ago about a time that did not happen 30 years ago. I did intend instead to talk about a concept using the same phrase, regrettably perhaps, about a time in which, or a moment in which an industry or a world or a society will change. Having said that,
I think it was first used by Shakespeare.
oh, okay, Shakespeare. Thank you. I appreciate your contribution. Here's what I'll say. I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic in spite of things that worry me, like a power law curve. The jobs that are disappearing today will never come back. The jobs that are disappearing tomorrow will never come back. Having said that, I believe that humans will adapt. People will adapt. I am a free market person, almost always. That markets will adapt, that the spirit of people is indomitable, that entrepreneurs are very necessary, inside and outside large companies, that the aesthetic development of the artistic community and creative community continues apace and continues to teach us as engineers, scientists, mathematicians, entrepreneurs, many things about where we have to go. And that the more we go down the path we're going down, the more opportunity for wealth creation that is highly distributed, as is happening in the world today. The hundreds of millions of people who've been lifted out of poverty in South Asia and East Asia by commerce dwarfs by orders of magnitude the contributions and effects of philanthropy in the same amount of time or over hundreds of years. So I'm very, very optimistic. I think those people will drive very positive and exciting outcomes that will prohibit and prevent venal outcomes from obtaining here and overseas.
I like that. I want to say one thing very specific to that, though. I mean, in the Weibos in China is such an interesting thing to watch. You know, they can suppress commentary about the leader's health all they want. They cannot take the Weibos away from the Chinese people. They would not succeed. That would lead to social disorder that they couldn't tolerate. Therefore, that is a form of progress that I think can't be denied. And, you know, I see that kind of progress in other ways all across the world, and so that's why I'm so fundamentally optimistic. And the reality, in my view, I wrote a book about Facebook, which I think is very implicated in a lot of this stuff at a different level, but what it fundamentally represents is the empowerment of the individual, in my view. And if individuals are more empowered, then the ability of totalitarianism to really dominate is going to be much more difficult, and therefore... Yeah, right. Well, look at the percentage of the world's population that's involved in that stuff and do the math. I mean, yes, there is chaos. We have huge progress still to be made, but the reality is the majority of the world is moving forward at a very steady rate, and that is documented. I mean, go to gapminder.org and you can see it right there.
It sounds like you're advocating over a billion people join in this chaos.
So
you know what gapminder.org is? Have you ever gone there? Check it out.
David and I fence about this a lot because he is a kind of a technophile more than I am. Well, about social media, maybe a social media file, and I find, forgive me, people over 40 often are, and people under 40 often are not. There's a kind of psychosexual need to adapt very quickly to technology that may, in fact, radically change your career. And so he and I fence about this a lot. Here's what I'll say. You know, Evgeny Morozov is a guy you should read because you and he might be of a feather on a couple things. He's written on the topic of whether totalitarian regimes can actually adapt to things like Weibo and make use of them for their own needs and own ends. And I strongly believe they are and will do are doing that and will do that. So I'm not as sort of purely cheerleading as I perceive David to be, although I appreciate that he does that for our industry.
Incorrectly, if I might.
Okay, incorrectly. Okay, fine. So on the other hand, through the fullness of time, and through the waves that we're going through now over and over and again, I think that I think there's a very large and significant reason to be very optimistic.
There is one central problem, that is everything's getting faster and faster, as you all said, and you only get one shot of this. We only have one reality.
Excuse me, with great respect, there are actually many other people who might actually want to
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to? You want to ask something? You want to say something? You got your mouth open. Say it.
Okay, just very quickly, I think one of the main issues is probably that corporations aren't necessarily the best adapters or best pathways for innovation for entrepreneurs in terms of their roles, in terms of their mentor, in terms of the lack of latency when it comes to their effort. Are probably better adapters of innovation. So it's really for people who are on the panel who represent academia and represent corporations, it's more a question, I guess, as stakeholders, how your roles could actually be better used to actually help entrepreneurs alongside venture capitalists such as
Well, there's the question of will big companies even be able to survive against the forces that represented by smaller organizations? I think a lot of people wonder about that these days.
There's a role that corporations need to play with entrepreneurs alongside them and facilitate.
I don't agree. I appreciate the power of the question. I don't agree. I think corporations should buy companies from entrepreneurs and otherwise get out of the way, and academia should produce entrepreneurs. So I think your question is very powerful and comes to the right place, but basically entrepreneurs want to be left alone and want people to get out of their way, and so I don't believe in the type of partnership I think you're proposing. There may be very intelligent opinions that are different from mine. There often are, but I appreciate the power of your question.
What about Tom? What do you think on that, Tom?
So sharpen the question for me.
It's how can big companies take advantage of the innovations of entrepreneurs or the world? I mean, we've got big organizations and we've got an increasing fertile field of entrepreneurship at the ground level. How does that interaction evolve most productively, I guess, is sort of what you're kind of asking.
I think there's huge potential synergies. It's not an either or. It's not that one is going to dominate and completely drive out the other. I think they need each other in a lot of cases for the foreseeable future. I think that, as Michael was saying, big companies can buy innovative entrepreneurial companies. That's great. Another thing that big companies do is provide the infrastructure that makes it possible for Michael to develop software in a month rather than in 2 years. They provide the networks. They provide the software tools, et cetera. Yeah. So I think the big companies in some parts of the economy really make possible the innovative froth at the top of the stack by entrepreneurs in other parts of the economy. I think academia can certainly play a productive role in helping both and encouraging the connections and turning out the entrepreneurs and all that. So
real fast?
Yeah. So just a thought. There's been several cycles on innovation through the history of the U.S. Just as an example, in the early 1900s to about 1970, large companies dominated innovation, right? You had the Bell Labs and you had all these, really, really big organizations. Then in the 80s, 90s until today, you had this marriage of an entrepreneur who was displeased in a large corporation, got funding from a venture capital, and we started this wave. I would almost venture to say that based on where the world is today, I think large corporations have the opportunity to be much more innovative if they were to change the way they approach it, right? Most large companies have a not invented here syndrome. You have the engineers saying, oh, if it's not invented here, it's no good. And if they miss the mark, they end up buying something and just trying to bring it in. And, we went at Cisco from very, early stage investments and buying 3 or 4 companies at the very early stage to shifting over the last 8 to 9 years where we bought late stage companies that are generating revenue and we paid a heck of a lot higher multiple. The right answer moving forward is a hybrid of that. We're going to enter in where we're going to really harness the innovation of our company, our partners, and the things I've talked about, but we're going to link much more to university environments and do much more funding. We're going to link into entrepreneurs and say, here are areas that we want more. We're going to go more to the VCs and say, look, these are the kind of things we want, and actually create ecosystems and build things around it, because ultimately, in a globally connected world, relentless innovation is your only differentiator.
Okay, over here.
Hi, my name is Bomi. Is this working?
Sorry. Wait,
Can
I
you
don't
hear
even see, is it you? You got the mic?
standing
Oh, there's a mic, good, okay, good.
I don't know if it's working.
It is working.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Bomi Jung, and I work for Enterprise, which is a national affordable housing organization. So in my field, the thing that most folks are thinking about innovating around is how to put roofs over the heads of about the bottom quarter of earners in this country. So my question to y'all as innovators is, at what point in the process is it appropriate to think about to whom the benefits of the innovation accrue and on whom the burdens fall, not in the sort of like, destiny of humans, time frame, but in that crunchy middle painful period.
Yeah, that's awesome. John, what do you think?
Well, there are many questions nested in that one, and because I think that we're going to have new ways of thinking about how to finance and reap the value of certain kinds of innovations, having bottom-up innovations. I think in housing is particularly interesting. I mean, if you brought in that case, there's some kind of innovations that are going on in Africa to have very, I guess it was a combination of entrepreneurs around the world to develop very inexpensive ways of being able to build buildings and have people help build them out themselves. But that starts to entail a new kind of financial infrastructure. And I think that the whole idea, and this comes into property issues. I was in Ethiopia about talking to a number of people about what's happening in land reform and the investment supposedly that's going into land reform, that actually then you throw people off the land, and then you have a high capital intensive agriculture, and you create all the disparities. I think you need new kind of financial models. So this sort of in this building, say post-capitalist models of how to actually fund those things and how to reap the value of it. And I don't think we've figured that out yet. But new kind of markets and exchanges for doing this. It's one area that we're looking at both at IDQ but also at MIT, new kinds of exchanges and digital currencies and how to fund things, to enable new kind of innovations to have people be able to take the benefit of them. I mean, that's another major area of innovation, I think, in the business model. I mean, when this conversation about companies acquiring companies, and that my experience has been, and Mike, you made the point, that entrepreneurs like to be free. And what happens, the bigger companies come in, they say, now you're going to act like us, and they kill it. But Cisco's been very good at that. So, I mean, they're amazing. But then what happens? I mean, well, okay, but so what does a company become? Because you brought up the prisoner's dilemma, not the prisoner's dilemma, but the innovator's dilemma issue, that you have something that's $1 million, and actually things change so quickly that $1 million becomes $1 billion in a very short period of time.
I want to get to more audience, but Tom, real quick.
So I really like the phrase crunchy middle time frame. I love that, and I think it suggests an answer or an addition to the kind of framework we've been evolving here. Good innovation requires lots of ideas bubbling up. It requires good ways of recognizing the good ones, but what this question also suggests is that it requires incentives for the innovations that we think are desirable. So if the only incentive that entrepreneurs are serving is making more money for themselves, and if nobody's willing to pay much for affordable housing, then there's not much incentive for innovation in that space. But if there is a societal desire to put financial incentives there, or if we develop a society where you get some kind of significant non-financial benefits from being a social entrepreneur who solves those kinds of problems, then I think the rest of the ecosystem that we're talking about can focus on problems like the crunchy middle time frame housing question.
Alternatively, dismantling some of the obstacles through the process of capture, economic capture, that prevent entrepreneurial innovation. So for example, I'm making this up because I don't know much about housing. Let's say there are 3 companies, making this up, that dominate distribution of materials, dominate distribution of contracts, dominate the modes of construction, right? And so through 50 years of behemoth enterprise, of plugging into city councils and state councils and legislatures and the US legislatures, they can dominate the way products get to market. If you are a small company, you look at that morass and you understand it is fatal to enter that process and fatal to fight there, and therefore you do not innovate there. So dismantling that would be a key approach. Same thing happens in the United States in weapons development. Weapons development is, leading into our next panel in an hour, weapons development is dominated by 3 or 4 companies. It's impossible to, as a small company, compete there. Therefore, you end up going through those small companies. So dismantling the capture and obstacles would actually free up entrepreneurship that would answer some of these problems in this crunchy middle time.
Can we get the mic in the front row? There's somebody there, right there. Oh, okay. Well, she's had her hand up for a really long time. Okay, you say something, and then you say something, and then we'll, go ahead, you got the mic. And then we'll get to her, and then we'll have the audience.
I'm responding to you, actually, Dave. I want to thank you, because I am your example, but I don't have an esplanade. But I have founded an organization, a nonprofit, and I fit into your example of someone who is over the limit. And my biggest problem right now is disseminating or getting information out of academia for veterinary and medical science where I can create awareness to the general public in people talk. And I'm finding it very difficult to collect all the information aside from Google alerts. So enlighten me.
That might be more than we have time for in this remaining 2 minutes, because I'd really like to hear that. That's an interesting point, and let's just hear a few more thoughts.
So my name's Heather Berlin. I'm a neuroscientist. I'm really interested in what you think about investing large sums of money into these big projects like Blue Brain, which is to model the human brain in a sort of supercomputer and get more at, instead of AI, which I think, we already have computers which are really intelligent. I mean, Watson from IBM, but, computers that might be conscious. So, but I want to know what you think about the merits of putting a large sum of money into these big projects. I got cut off. Big projects, or is it better to invest it perhaps in other ways rather than putting all your eggs in one basket? And what do you think the merits of that is, or not?
Whatever the answer is, make it really short.
Yes.
Solomon, you got it?
Yeah, I think it has a lot of merits, mainly because if you look at the rate of development in terms of computation and communication, it's definitely slowing down. We're really hitting a brick wall, and we can discuss that later. But the bottom line is we need to come up with new types of architectures. And one thing we really have to look at is our brain, especially when you look at image recognition and different types of computation. The brain is a really, really good example. Very slow, but very good. So there's a lot of merits if we're looking 20, 30 years down the line. Now, is it a good business decision or so? I don't know. What I know is we have some research on that, for example.
I mean, do we have time for a few more things? No, okay. Unfortunately, we don't. One of the things about what you just said is government in the United States ain't going to fund it, especially the way things are going right now. But what I see happening is a lot of independent philanthropy converging around really big challenges with really big bucks. And I think because there is a concentration of wealth and there's a lot of billionaires and a lot of them want to do something kind of cool, you may see multi-billion-dollar research efforts in various areas that are funded privately increasingly. I actually know one that's underway that's still under wraps, and it's going to happen. So that, whether it's right or wrong, big challenge with big bucks are going to be happening. So obviously there's a lot to discuss, and sorry we couldn't get to other questions and comments, but thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.